The hammer fell like thunder against the anvil, sending sparks cascading across the dirt floor of the forge, and Kaden Everhart barely noticed the acrid smell of heated metal anymore after 12 years of working alone in this forsaken corner of the Westmark frontier. Sweat dripped from his brow despite the cool autumn air filtering through the open walls of his smithy, a structure he had built with his own hands after the war had taken everything else from him. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered and calloused, with dark hair that fell into eyes the color of storm clouds. Most days, he spoke to no one but the occasional farmer needing a plow repaired or a merchant passing through who required fresh horseshoes. The isolation suited him. It had been that way since he had left the king's army 5 years ago, unable to stomach any more bloodshed, any more screaming, any more death. The road to the market town of Greystone ran past his forge, and it was along this dusty track that he heard the commotion that would change everything. Shouting voices carried on the wind, rough and jubilant in a way that made his jaw tighten with recognition. He had heard that particular tone before, usually right before something terrible happened. Setting down his hammer, Kaden wiped his hands on his leather apron and stepped outside, squinting against the afternoon sun. A crowd had gathered perhaps a quarter-mile down the road, near the old hanging tree that stood like a gnarled sentinel at the crossroads. Kaden's stomach dropped. He had passed that tree countless times, had seen its branches bear their grim fruit more often than he cared to remember. The Westmark was a hard place, and justice here was swift and often brutal. But something about the size of the crowd, about the eagerness in their voices, made him abandon his work and start walking toward them. As he drew closer, he could make out the details that would haunt him. 7 figures hung from ropes tied to the thick lower branches of the oak, their feet dangling inches above the ground. They were not dead yet. Their bodies jerked and twisted, hands clawing uselessly at the nooses around their necks, and they were orcs. Kaden had fought orcs during the war. He had killed them, had watched them kill his friends, had learned to recognize the difference between warriors and civilians, between soldiers following orders and families trying to survive. These were not warriors. Even from a distance, he could see that most of them were female, their builds lighter than male orcs, their clothing simple homespun rather than armor or war gear. One looked barely more than a child. The crowd was perhaps 30 strong, mostly men from Greystone and the surrounding farmsteads, along with a handful of the town's self-appointed militia. They jeered and threw stones, and Kaden recognized the merchant Aldrich standing at the front, his face flushed with self-righteous fury. "Filthy greenskins," Aldrich was shouting. "Caught them sneaking through Patterson's northern field like the thieves they are, probably planning to raid the granaries before winter. Well, they picked the wrong town." Kaden pushed through the crowd, his size and the intensity of his expression causing people to step aside. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. He had seen enough killing to know the difference between justice and murder, and this was the latter dressed up in the former's clothing. "Cut them down," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieting crowd. Aldrich turned, his eyebrows rising. "Everhart, what business is this of yours? Go back to your forge." "Cut them down," Kaden repeated, stepping closer to the tree. The orcs were still struggling, their green skin darkening with the strain, eyes bulging with desperation. The smallest one, the young one, was making terrible choking sounds that cut through him like a blade. "What crime did they commit?" "I told you," Aldrich said impatiently. "Trespassing, probably planning theft or worse. These monsters cannot be trusted. Did they steal anything? They would have, given time. Did they threaten anyone, attack anyone? Aldrich's face reddened further. They do not need to. Their very presence is a threat. The war may be over, but that does not mean we should let their kind wander our lands freely. The magistrate agreed. The magistrate is 3 days' ride from here, Kaden said flatly. You did not wait for trial. You did not wait for anything. You are murdering them. A ripple of unease went through some of the crowd, but others muttered agreement with Aldrich. The merchant drew himself up to his full height, which still left him half a head shorter than Kaden. The law is clear. Orcs found on settled lands without permission can be dealt with as threats to public safety. We have every right. Kaden did not wait to argue further. He strode to the nearest hanging figure, a female orc whose struggles were weakening, and wrapped his arms around her legs, lifting to take the pressure off the noose. She gasped, a horrible rattling sound, and her hands scrabbled at the rope with renewed desperation. "What are you doing?" Aldrich shrieked. "Stop him! He is helping the enemy." 2 of the militia moved forward, but Kaden fixed them with a look that stopped them cold. They were farm boys playing at being soldiers, and he was a veteran who had seen real war. They knew it, and he knew it. "Get me a knife," he growled. "Unless you want to try stopping me and find out what happens." No one moved. Kaden shifted his grip on the orc woman, holding her higher with one arm while his other hand fumbled at his belt for the small blade he kept there. It was meant for cutting leather, not rope, but it would have to do. He sawed frantically at the thick hemp while the orc woman wheezed above him, her weight pressing down on his shoulder. The rope parted with a snap, and she collapsed against him, nearly dragging them both to the ground. Kaden lowered her carefully, pulling the noose from her throat. Her skin was marked with deep grooves where the rope had bitten, and she sucked in great shuddering breaths, her yellow eyes wide with shock and terror. "Stay down," he told her quietly, then moved to the next figure. "This is madness," Aldrich sputtered, but he made no move to intervene. The crowd was uncertain now, their bloodlust cooled by Kaden's intervention. Violence against helpless creatures was easier when no one challenged it. One by one, Kaden cut down the 7 orcs. His arms burned with the effort of supporting their weight, his small knife barely adequate for the task. The second orc was another female, older, with scars marking her arms and a face twisted with pain and rage. The third was the youngest, a girl who could not have been more than 16 or 17, tears streaming down her green cheeks as she coughed and retched. The fourth and fifth were also female sisters perhaps, with similar features and matching expressions of bewildered fear. The sixth was different, larger, with the broader shoulders of a male, but still unarmed and dressed in simple traveling clothes. The seventh was a female who appeared middle-aged by orc standards, her tusks slightly yellowed, her dark hair streaked with gray. By the time he lowered the last one to the ground, Kaden's shoulders screamed with fatigue and his hands were blistered from the rough rope. The 7 orcs lay in a semicircle, all still bound at the wrists, all gasping and coughing, all staring at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to suspicion. The crowd had grown quieter. Some were already slinking away, perhaps embarrassed by what they had been part of. But Aldrich stood his ground, his face purple with rage. "You have made yourself an enemy of this town, Everhart," he spat. "The magistrate will hear of this. You will answer for harboring monsters." "Send for him then," Kaden replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Let him see what passes for justice in Greystone. I am certain he will be impressed." He turned his back on Aldrich, a calculated insult, and knelt beside the youngest orc. Up close, she looked even more like a child, her features not yet settled into the full hardness of orc adulthood. She flinched when he reached for the ropes binding her wrists, but did not pull away. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly, sawing through the bonds. "Can you walk?" she nodded jerkily, not meeting his eyes. He moved to the next orc, the older scarred female, and cut her free as well. She did meet his eyes, and what he saw there was a mixture of calculation and wariness that he recognized. This one had survived too much to trust easily. "Why?" she asked, her voice like gravel still damaged from the noose. "Why help us?" "Because it was wrong," Kaden said simply, moving to free the others. That is reason enough. By the time he had cut all 7 loose, most of the crowd had dispersed. Only Aldrich remained with a handful of his most loyal supporters, watching from a distance with open hostility. Kaden ignored them and focused on the orcs, who had pulled themselves into a tight defensive cluster, still not quite believing they were free. "You cannot stay here," he told them. "They will try again once I am gone, or they will bring more people. Can you travel?" The older female who had spoken before stepped forward slightly, clearly the leader of this group. "We can travel. Where would you have us go? Back to the territories? We came from there. There is nothing left." Something in her tone made Kaden's chest tighten. "What happened?" "War happened," she said bitterly. "Your people happened. Our village was destroyed 6 months ago by soldiers claiming we had violated the treaty. We have been wandering ever since, trying to find somewhere safe, somewhere that would tolerate us." She gestured at the hanging tree. "This is what we found." Kaden rubbed his face, thinking quickly. The smart thing would be to point them toward the North Mark, where orc settlements were more common and better tolerated. But that was weeks of travel through increasingly hostile territory, and this group was weak, traumatized, and included a child. They would never make it. "My forge is a mile back up the road," he heard himself saying, and part of him wondered if he had lost his mind. "There is a barn with a loft. It is not much, but it is shelter. You can rest there tonight, and in the morning I will help you figure out where to go." The female studied him for a long moment. "You would shelter us, after your people tried to kill us." "They are not my people," Kaden said quietly. "Not anymore. Not after this." She nodded slowly, then turned to confer quietly with the others in their own language, a series of guttural sounds that Kaden did not understand. Finally, she turned back. "We accept. But know this, human. If this is a trap, we will fight. We have little left to lose." "It is not a trap. Follow me." The walk back to his forge felt like the longest mile of Kaden's life. He was acutely aware of the 7 orcs trailing behind him, of the eyes he could feel watching from the scattered farmsteads they passed, of the magnitude of what he had just done. He had made enemies today. Real enemies. And he had tied himself to the fate of 7 strangers who had every reason to distrust him. His forge stood where he had left it. The fire in the hearth burned down to coals, his half-finished work still waiting on the anvil. The barn was a separate structure, weathered but solid, with a loft filled with hay and a lower level that housed his single horse and a milk cow. He led the orcs inside, noting how they moved together, always keeping the youngest in the center of their group, always watching. "The loft," he said, pointing. "There are blankets in that chest. I will bring food and water." The older female nodded. "I am Groshka," she said. "This is my sister Drenka, her daughters Nazga and Ursha, my daughter Makra, my nephew Gorduk, and the young one is Zuriel. She is not blood, but she is ours now. Her family died in the attack." Kaden filed the names away, nodding to each in turn. Groshka and Drenka were the older females, both showing signs of hard living. Nazga and Ursha were the sisters, both in their 20s perhaps, both watching him with open suspicion. Makra was the scarred one he had cut down first, maybe close to his own age, with eyes that missed nothing. Gorduk was the only male, younger than Kaden had first thought, maybe mid-20s, with an injured leg that made him limp. And Zuriel was the girl, the child, still crying softly as Ursha held her close. "I am Kaden Everhart," he said. "I will be back with supplies." He left them to settle in and returned to his small house adjacent to the forge. It was a simple structure, just one large room with a hearth, a bed, a table, and a few chairs. He had built it for solitude, never imagining he would need to provision refugees. But he set about gathering what he could: bread, dried meat, a wheel of cheese, apples from his small orchard, and a large jug of water. It was not much, but it would keep them for tonight. When he returned to the barn, he found them huddled in the loft, watching him climb the ladder with wary expressions. He set the food down and stepped back, giving them space. "It is not much," he said, "but it is what I have." Groshka moved forward and examined the offerings, then nodded. "It is generous, thank you. In the morning we will talk about what comes next. For tonight, rest. You are safe here." He turned to leave, but Makra's voice stopped him. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why risk yourself for us? We are nothing to you." Kaden paused on the ladder, thinking about how to answer. Finally, he said, "I spent 5 years in the king's army. I saw a lot of killing. I did a lot of killing. When I left, I swore I would never stand by and watch murder happen again if I could prevent it. That is all." Just like that. Makra pressed. No grand reason, no secret agenda, just like that. He descended the ladder and left them to their meal, returning to his house as twilight deepened into night. He did not sleep much. Every sound outside made him tense, waiting for Aldrich and his mob to come with torches and pitchforks. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn broke gray and cool over the Westmark, Kaden rose to find his unexpected guest still there, still alive, and still his responsibility. He made a simple breakfast of porridge and eggs, then carried it to the barn. The Orcs were awake, sitting in a circle in the loft, talking quietly. They fell silent when he appeared, and he noticed that Gortuk had positioned himself near the ladder, clearly standing guard despite his injured leg. "Breakfast," Kaden announced, setting down the pot and a stack of wooden bowls. "We should talk about what happens next." Groshka descended the ladder with surprising grace for someone who had nearly been hanged the day before. Up close, in the morning light filtering through gaps in the barn walls, she looked both older and harder than he had first thought. Her dark eyes assessed him with the same calculating intelligence he had seen in veteran soldiers. "We have already discussed this among ourselves," she said. "We cannot stay. Our presence puts you in danger, and we will not repay your kindness by bringing trouble to your door. We will leave today, head north, and try to reach the territories before winter sets in." "That is a 6-week journey at least," Kaden said. "Probably longer in your condition. And the Northmark is not much safer than here. You will face the same prejudice, the same violence. Perhaps, but staying here ensures trouble for everyone. That merchant, Aldrich, he will return. He will bring others. We saw the hatred in his eyes." She was right, and Kaden knew it. But the thought of sending them back out into the wilderness, weak and vulnerable, sat heavy in his stomach. "Give it a few days," he said. "Rest and recover your strength. Let me make some inquiries, see if there is anywhere closer that might take you in." "Why do you care?" Makra called down from the loft. "We are Orcs. Your people want us dead. Surely you have heard all the stories, all the reasons we are monsters." "I have heard them," Kaden acknowledged. "I have also seen the truth during the war. Orcs are not monsters. Some are warriors, some are cruel, some are kind, just like humans. The war was started by leaders on both sides who wanted power and land. Most of the people fighting just wanted to survive and protect their homes." A heavy silence followed his words. Finally, Drenka spoke, her voice softer than her sister's. "You fought against us." "I did. I killed Orcs. They killed humans I cared about. It was war, and in war everyone loses something." He met each of their gazes in turn. But the war is over. We have a choice now about what kind of world we build. I would rather build one where 7 innocent travelers do not get hanged for the crime of existing. Zuriel's small voice drifted down. I want to stay, just for a little while. I am so tired of running. Grashka's expression softened when she looked up at the girl, and Kaden saw a flash of the person beneath the hard exterior. Very well, she said to Kaden. 3 days. We will rest for 3 days and then we must go. It is all we can risk. 3 days, Kaden agreed. And you do not need to hide in the barn the whole time. My property is large enough that you can move around without being seen from the road. There is a stream to the east where you can wash. There is firewood and cookpots in the shed behind my house. Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed. The Orcs kept mostly to the barn and the wooded areas behind Kaden's property, avoiding the road and any potential witnesses. Kaden continued his work in the forge, though he found himself distracted, constantly listening for trouble, constantly aware of his guest's presence. On the second day, Macra approached him while he was working on a set of hinges for a customer in Greystone. He had not decided yet whether he would dare deliver them or simply abandon the commission. She stood at the edge of the forge, watching him work with evident interest. I used to watch our village smith, she said after a while. Before the attack, he made beautiful things. Swords, yes, but also gates and candle holders and a bell for our gathering hall. Kaden glanced up from his work. You miss it. I miss everything. She stepped closer, her eyes on the glowing metal. We had a life, a home, I had a husband. Her hand went unconsciously to a leather cord around her neck from which hung a simple iron ring. He died defending the village. By the time the soldiers left, there was nothing worth defending, just ashes and bodies. I am sorry. Are you? The question was not hostile, just curious. You said you fought for the king. Perhaps you were there. Perhaps you helped destroy my home. Perhaps, Kaden said quietly. If I had known then what I know now, I would not have. But I cannot change the past. None of us can. Macra was silent for a moment, then reached out and touched the edge of the anvil, her fingers tracing the worn surface. My mother said you are an unusual human. I think she is right. Your mother is Grashka. Yes, she was a leader in our village, one of the elders. She is struggling with accepting charity, even from someone who saved our lives. Orcs value strength and self-sufficiency. Being dependent on others, especially a human, goes against everything we were taught. I do not see it as charity, Kaden said, more like basic decency. If the positions were reversed, would your people not help someone in need? That depends on whether that someone was orc or human, Macra said with brutal honesty. The war poisoned both our peoples. Trust is not something easily given anymore. She left him to his work, but after that, she came to the forge often, watching him shape metal, asking occasional questions about technique or temperature. Kaden found himself looking forward to her visits. There was a sharp intelligence to her, a directness he appreciated after years of solitude. On the third morning, Gorduk approached while Kaden was mending a broken blade. The young male moved with a pronounced limp, his injured leg clearly causing him pain. How did that happen? Kaden asked, nodding at the leg. Spear thrust during the attack on our village, Gorduk said. It did not heal right. Grashka says I will limp forever now. Despite the words, there was no self-pity in his tone, just acceptance. May I look at it? Gorduk hesitated, then nodded. He sat on a stump near the forge and rolled up his trouser leg. The scarring was extensive, and Kaden could see immediately that the muscles had healed poorly, twisted and knotted in a way that would cause chronic pain and weakness. There might be surgery that could help, Kaden said slowly. but it would require a skilled healer and the recovery would be long and difficult. Neither of which we have access to, Gortuk said pragmatically. I have learned to manage, at least I can walk. He studied Kaden for a moment. You have medical knowledge, field medicine. I learned during the war, enough to stitch wounds and set bones, but not enough for something like this. Field medicine is more than most have. Gortuk pulled his trouser leg back down. Zuriel asks about you. She wants to know if you are truly as kind as you seem or if you are waiting to betray us. What do you think? I think if you wanted to betray us, you would have done it already. I think you are genuine, which makes you either very brave or very foolish. Possibly both. Kaden had to smile at that. Probably both. As the 3-day deadline approached, Kaden found himself increasingly reluctant to see them go, not just because he worried about their safety, though he did, but because, in some strange way, having them there had broken the isolation he had wrapped himself in. He had not realized how much he had withdrawn from the world until the world, in the form of 7 desperate orcs, had forced its way back in. On the evening of the 3rd day, Grashka came to his house. He had just finished a meager dinner and was sitting by the hearth, staring into the flames and trying not to think about the empty road they would walk tomorrow. "May I enter?" she asked from the doorway. "Of course." She stepped inside, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings with a single sweep. "You live simply." "I need very little, a lonely life. By choice." Grashka settled into the chair across from him, moving with the stiffness of someone whose body had endured too much. "We will leave tomorrow at first light, as agreed. I wanted to thank you properly, away from the others. What you did, stopping that mob, sheltering us, it was the act of a good man. Such men are rare in this world. I did what anyone should have done, but most would not have. Most would have walked past and told themselves it was not their concern." She leaned forward slightly. "I am no fool, Kaden Everhart. I know what your actions have cost you. That merchant will spread word of what you did. You will lose customers. Your neighbors will turn against you. You may face legal trouble when the magistrate arrives, and for what? 7 orcs you had never met who can offer you nothing in return. I do not want anything in return. I know, that is why I am here." She took a deep breath. "I have a proposition. Let us stay." Kaden blinked. "What?" "Let us stay. Not in your barn forever like beggars, but here on your land. We can build our own shelter in the woods behind your property. We can work, contribute. Gortuk was a farmer before the war. Drenka is skilled with herbs and healing. Makra can hunt and trap. The others have skills too. We can earn our keep, and in turn, we have a place to weather the winter. By spring, perhaps the situation will be calmer and we can move on, or perhaps we can find a way to stay permanently." "That would make the situation worse," Kaden pointed out. "Right now, Aldrich can claim I acted impulsively, that I was foolish but not treasonous. If you stay, if people find out, he will have grounds to call me an orc sympathizer, maybe worse. Only if people find out. We are good at staying hidden. It is a skill we have learned well these past months." Kaden stared into the fire, weighing the risks. She was right that having them stay would compound the danger. But she was also right that sending them out to face the wilderness and hostile territories as winter approached was tantamount to a death sentence. And there was another factor, one he was reluctant to acknowledge even to himself. He did not want them to leave. These 3 days had been the first time in years that his small homestead had felt like something other than a self-imposed exile. "If you stay," he said slowly, "we do it smart. We build your shelter deep in the woods where it cannot be seen from the road. You stay out of sight during the day when travelers might pass. I continue my work as normal, give no indication that anything has changed. We pool resources, work together but carefully. Very carefully. Groshka's face broke into the first real smile he had seen from her. "Then we have an agreement. We have an agreement. But Groshka, you need to understand, if Aldrich or others like him find out, there will be violence. I can fight, but I cannot fight off a whole town. If it comes to that, you run. Do not try to defend me or this place. Just run and do not look back. You ask us to abandon you if trouble comes. I ask you to survive. That is what matters." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her reassessing him yet again. "You are an unusual man, Kaden Everhart. I begin to think you are also a good one. Very well. We will accept your terms and hope it does not come to that." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Instead of preparing to depart, the Orcs began scouting locations for their shelter. Kaden worked through his backlog of forge orders while keeping half an eye on their progress. By midday, they had chosen a spot about a quarter-mile into the woods, near the stream but hidden from sight by thick undergrowth and a small rise in the land. Kaden provided tools and helped them fell trees, his experience with construction proving useful. They worked quickly and efficiently, and he was impressed by their skill. Within 3 days, the frame of a longhouse was taking shape, built in the Orc style with thick posts and layered walls that would provide insulation against the coming winter. Gorduk directed much of the construction, despite his injured leg, his knowledge of building evident in every decision. The women did much of the heavy lifting, and Kaden was reminded that Orc females were physically stronger than most human men. Zuriel helped where she could, mostly gathering smaller branches for kindling and weaving, but she tired easily and often sat watching instead. Kaden noticed that Makra stayed close to the girl, always keeping her in sight, protective in a way that spoke of deep affection. One afternoon, while taking a break from the construction, Zuriel approached Kaden where he sat by the stream, cooling his hands in the water. "May I ask you something?" She said shyly, "Of course." "Why do you live alone? Do you have no family?" "I had family once," Kaden said. "Parents, a younger sister. They died during the war. A fever swept through the village while I was away fighting. By the time I got the message and made it home, they had been dead for 2 months. I am sorry." Her voice was very small. "My parents died too, and my brother. The soldiers came during the night. They said we were harboring weapons, but we were not. We were just farmers. My father tried to explain, but they did not listen." Kaden felt his throat tighten. "I am sorry that happened to you. No child should see such things. Makra says I must be strong, that dwelling on the past will not help, but I dream about it every night. I see the fire and hear my mother screaming, and I cannot make it stop." He moved carefully to sit beside her, close but not touching, giving her space. "It will get better," he said quietly. "Not right away and not completely. The memories will always be there, but over time they will hurt less. You will be able to remember the good things about your family without the pain overwhelming everything else. I promise." "How long did it take for you?" "Years, and there are still hard days, but fewer than there used to be." Zuriel nodded, digesting this. Then, with the sudden shift that children were capable of, she asked, "Do you like Makra?" Kaden blinked, caught off guard. "What, Makra?" "She watches you when you are working. She talks about you at night. I think she likes you." That is." "We barely know each other," Kaden stammered, feeling his face heat. Zuriel giggled, the first genuinely young sound he had heard from her. "You are blushing. You do like her." "I think you should go help gather firewood," Kaden said firmly, but he could not quite suppress a smile. She scampered off, still giggling, leaving him staring at the stream and wondering if what she had said was true. Did Makra watch him? He had been so focused on the practical concerns of their situation that he had not let himself think about her as anything other than one of his responsibilities. But now that the idea had been planted, he could not uproot it. He found himself remembering the way she stood at the edge of his forge, the intensity in her yellow eyes when she asked questions, the grace with which she moved despite her scars. The construction took 2 weeks to complete. The longhouse was simple but well built, with a central hearth, sleeping platforms along the walls, and a storage area for food and supplies. They thatched the roof with reeds from the stream and chinked the walls with mud and moss. When it was finished, Groshka declared it adequate, which from her seemed to be high praise. A routine developed. The orcs stayed mostly hidden, venturing out of the woods only after dark or when Kaden confirmed that no travelers were on the road. Drenka began tending a small garden plot behind the longhouse, using seeds she had saved from their destroyed village. Gorduk helped Kaden with heavy work around the forge when needed, his strength compensating for his limited mobility. The sisters, Nazga and Ursha, took over hunting and trapping, bringing back game that supplemented their supplies. Zuriel helped with cooking and mending, learning skills from Drenka that her own mother had not lived long enough to teach her, and Makra became a constant presence at the forge. She had an aptitude for metalwork that surprised both of them. Her hands were steady, her eye for detail sharp, and she learned quickly. Within a few weeks, she was helping with simple tasks, holding pieces steady while he hammered, pumping the bellows, even doing some of the finishing work on smaller items. They talked while they worked, carefully at first, then with increasing ease. She told him about her life before the war, about growing up in a village where humans were spoken of as enemies but never actually seen, about falling in love with a warrior named Krusk, who had courted her with poetry and made her laugh, about their simple wedding and their plans to build a home and raise children, about watching him die with a sword through his chest while she had been powerless to help. Kaden told her about his own life, about growing up as a blacksmith's son and learning the trade from his father, about joining the army more for the steady pay than any sense of patriotism, about slowly becoming disillusioned as the war dragged on, and the reasons for fighting became murkier, about coming home to find his family dead and realizing he had no one left in the world. "We are both ghosts," Makra said one day as they worked on a set of door hinges together. "Neither of us belongs to the world we once knew. We are caught between what was and what might be." "Perhaps," Kaden said, "or perhaps we are building something new, something that did not exist before." She looked at him across the anvil, and he saw something shift in her expression, something that made his breath catch. "Perhaps," she agreed softly. The moment was broken by Nazga bursting into the forge, her face pale beneath her green skin. "Riders coming, 5 of them wearing militia colors." Kaden's stomach dropped. "Get back to the longhouse. Tell everyone to stay hidden and quiet. I will handle this." Makra hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him, but Nazga grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Kaden quickly scanned the forge, making sure there was no evidence of orc presence, then stepped outside to meet the approaching riders. Aldrich was among them, along with 4 men wearing the red and gold armbands of Greystone's militia. They reined in before his forge, and Aldrich dismounted with a self-satisfied expression that made Kaden's hands clench into fists. "Everhart," Aldrich said, "we have come to discuss your actions 3 weeks ago." "What about them?" "You interfered with a lawful execution. You freed dangerous criminals, and witnesses report that you threatened citizens with violence." "I prevented a lynching," Kaden corrected. "There was no trial, no magistrate, no evidence of any crime beyond being orcs on the road. And I threatened no one. I simply made it clear I would not stand by and watch murder." One of the militiamen, a grizzled veteran named Cormac, whom Kaden vaguely recognized from his army days, spoke up. "Where are they now, the orcs you freed?" "Gone," They left the next morning, headed north. I gave them some food and sent them on their way. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You expect us to believe that? More likely you are hiding them somewhere, sheltering enemies of humanity. Believe what you like. They are gone. Then you will not mind if we search your property. Kaden's heart hammered, but he kept his expression neutral. I mind very much. You have no authority to search my land without cause, and you have no cause. I have broken no laws. You aided enemies, Aldrich snapped. I aided travelers who were being murdered without trial. The war is over, Aldrich. The Orcs are no longer enemies by law. Killing them without cause is murder, not justice. Cormac shifted in his saddle, and Kaden saw uncertainty flicker across his face. The veteran knew the difference between law and mob violence, even if he did not want to admit it. The magistrate is due in Greystone next week, Cormac said. He can sort this out properly. Until then, Everhart, I suggest you stay close to your forge and avoid any further incidents. It was not an arrest, but it was a clear warning. Kaden nodded. I have no intention of going anywhere. Aldrich looked like he wanted to argue, but Cormac was already turning his horse around. The militia followed, and after a moment of visible frustration, Aldrich remounted and rode after them. Kaden stood watching until they disappeared down the road, then let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding. He waited a full hour before going to the longhouse, wanting to be absolutely certain the militia was not watching. When he finally made his way through the woods, he found all 7 orcs armed and ready to fight. Groshka held a wickedly sharp hunting knife, Makra had a makeshift spear, and even Zuriel clutched a heavy branch. They are gone, Kaden said quickly. For now. But the magistrate is coming to Greystone next week. This is going to get worse before it gets better. We should leave, Groshka said immediately. Tonight, before they return with more men. No, Makra said, her eyes on Kaden. We should stay and fight if necessary. He saved our lives. We owe him. We owe him our survival, Groshka countered. Not our deaths. If we stay and they discover us, they will hang us again, and this time they will hang him too. The argument went back and forth, voices rising until Kaden held up his hands. Everyone stop. We are not making any decisions based on fear. Let me go to Greystone when the magistrate arrives. Let me speak with him, explain what happened. He is supposed to be a fair man, someone who upholds the actual law, not mob justice. Maybe we can resolve this peacefully. And if you cannot? Drenka asked quietly. Then we will decide what to do, but I am not giving up your safety or mine without trying every option first. They reluctantly agreed, though the tension remained high. That night, Kaden lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was being naive. Magistrates were still human, still subject to the same prejudices as everyone else. There was every chance that he would ride to Greystone and find himself arrested for treason, but he had to try. The week crawled past. Kaden continued his work, though few customers came to collect their orders. Word had clearly spread about what he had done, and most people in the area were avoiding him. Only old Marcus from the Fletcher farm came by, picking up a repaired scythe and paying without comment, though his expression was troubled. You have made powerful enemies, Kaden, Marcus said as he prepared to leave. Aldrich is pushing for charges, says you are a traitor and an orc lover. I am neither. I know that, but truth matters less than perception these days. He paused. For what it is worth, what you did, stopping that hanging, it took courage. My daughter saw the whole thing. She came home crying, saying she did not understand how people could be so cruel. Made me think about the kind of world we are building for our children. After Marcus left, Kaden found Makra waiting by the forge. She had been avoiding him since the militia's visit, staying close to the longhouse, and he had missed her presence more than he wanted to admit. You should not be out here, he said. It is too risky. I needed to see you." She stepped closer, and in the afternoon light he could see the concern etched into her features. "This magistrate, what if he sides with Aldrich? What if they arrest you? Then I will deal with it." "Kaden, please, you have already sacrificed so much for us. Do not throw your life away as well." "If the magistrate cannot be convinced, then we leave. We will find another way." "There is no other way," he said quietly. "Not for you, not in this region. Every town will be the same. Every village will see you as threats. If you want any chance at building a life, at finding peace, then someone has to stand up and say that what happened to you was wrong. Someone has to change how people think. And that someone has to be you. Who else? I saw it happen. I stopped it. I cannot go back now and pretend I did not." Makra looked at him for a long moment, and he saw her jaw tighten. Then, to his shock, she reached out and took his hand, her grip strong and warm. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. I have not decided which. Can I be both? Apparently." But she smiled when she said it, and did not let go of his hand. They stood like that, connected, until the sound of a wagon on the road sent her fleeing back into the woods. The day of the magistrate's arrival came too quickly. Kaden dressed in his best clothes, which were still plain work garments but at least clean and mended, and rode his horse into Greystone. The town was bustling with activity, farmers bringing in the last of the autumn harvest, merchants setting up for market day. But he felt the stares as he rode through, felt the weight of judgment and suspicion. The magistrate was holding court in the town hall, a large building at the center of Greystone's main square. Kaden tied his horse outside and entered, finding the hall packed with people. Aldrich was there at the front, along with several other town leaders, and behind a raised desk sat Magistrate Orwin, a thin man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Ah, Kaden Everhart," Orwin said as Kaden approached. "I have heard much about you this past week. You are accused of interfering with lawful punishment of criminals, aiding enemies of humanity, and making threats against citizens. How do you answer these charges?" "I prevented an unlawful execution," Kaden said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall. 7 orcs were being hanged without trial, without evidence of any crime beyond existing. I could not stand by and watch that happen. "They were trespassing on settled lands," Aldrich interjected. "That is crime enough." "Trespassing is not a capital offense," Kaden shot back. "And they were traveling on a public road, not invading someone's home. There was no threat, no violence, no theft. You hanged them because you could, not because justice demanded it." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Orwin held up a hand for silence. "I have reviewed the testimonies," he said. "And I must say, the situation is troubling. While it is true that orcs on settled lands without permission can be treated with suspicion, the law requires evidence of actual wrongdoing before punishment is administered. Mr. Aldrich, can you provide such evidence?" Aldrich sputtered. "Their presence was evidence enough. Everyone knows orcs cannot be trusted. That is prejudice, not evidence." Orwin's tone was cold. "And I do not base my rulings on prejudice. Mr. Everhart, where are these orcs now?" This was the moment of truth. Kaden could lie, maintain his story that they had moved on. But lies had a way of unraveling, and if they were discovered later, it would make everything worse. He took a deep breath and made his choice. "They are on my property," he said. "I offered them shelter for the winter. In spring, they will move on to the territories where their kind are better tolerated." The hall erupted. Voices rose in anger and disbelief, demands that he be arrested immediately, that the orcs be hunted down and killed. Aldrich looked triumphant. But Orwin's expression remained neutral, even thoughtful. "Silence," he commanded, and the hall gradually quieted. Mr. Everhart, you admit to harboring orcs on your land. I admit to providing shelter to 7 refugees who had nowhere else to go. They work for their keep. They have caused no trouble, they simply want to survive. And what of your customers, your neighbors? Are they comfortable with this arrangement? No, Kaden said honestly. Most have stopped doing business with me. I am effectively ostracized, but that is my choice and my consequence. I am not asking anyone else to accept them. I am simply asking to be left alone to do what I believe is right. Orwin leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. This is a difficult situation. On one hand, you have broken no law. Providing shelter is not illegal, even if the recipients are orcs. On the other hand, your actions have clearly caused unrest in the community. Many here fear that you are enabling future attacks or raids. If I may, Magistrate, Cormac stood from the crowd. The old veteran looked uncomfortable but determined. I have known Everhart since his army days. He is a good man, a loyal soldier. If he says these orcs are no threat, I am inclined to believe him. Perhaps we could inspect his property, verify that no weapons or hostile intent exists, and then allow this arrangement to continue under supervision. It was more than Kaden had hoped for. Aldrich looked furious at Cormac's suggestion, but others in the crowd seemed to be considering it. Orwin nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. Mr. Everhart, do you consent to an inspection of your property? I do, on the condition that it is conducted peacefully and that the orcs are not harmed or harassed. Agreed. Cormac, you will lead a small group to inspect Everhart's homestead. Mr. Aldrich, you may accompany them, but you will follow Cormac's lead. If the situation is as Everhart describes, no action will be taken. If evidence of threat is found, appropriate measures will be implemented. Is this acceptable to all parties? Kaden nodded. Aldrich looked like he had swallowed something bitter, but he too agreed. The inspection was scheduled for the following afternoon, giving Kaden time to ride home and warn his guests. He made it back in record time, his horse lathered with sweat. Groshka met him at the edge of the woods, her expression grim. We heard the horses, she said. You were followed. No, but they are coming tomorrow. The magistrate is allowing an inspection. Cormac will lead it and he is fair, but Aldrich will be with them. They want to see that you pose no threat. And if they decide we do, then we fight. But it will not come to that. You have done nothing wrong. There are no weapons beyond what you need for hunting. No signs of aggression or planning. If we can convince Cormac that you are just refugees trying to survive, he will report that to the magistrate. They gathered everyone at the longhouse and explained the situation. Gorduk wanted to run, Nazga wanted to set a trap, but Groshka made the final decision. We stay. We face this inspection. We show them we are not monsters. The next afternoon, Cormac arrived with 3 militia members and, unfortunately, Aldrich. Kaden met them at his forge and led them through the woods to the longhouse. The 7 orcs were waiting outside, standing in a line, unarmed and non-threatening. Zuriel was crying quietly, and Makra had an arm around her shoulders. Cormac dismounted and approached carefully, his hand near his sword but not drawing it. He looked at each orc in turn, his experienced eye cataloging details. Then he addressed Groshka, correctly identifying her as the leader. I am Cormac, captain of Greystone Militia. We are here to assess whether your presence poses a threat to the region. We pose no threat, Groshka said steadily. We are refugees. Our village was destroyed, our homes burned. We seek only shelter and peace. May we inspect your dwelling? You may. Cormac and 2 of the militia entered the longhouse while Aldrich remained outside, glaring at the orcs with undisguised hatred. Kaden positioned himself between the merchant and his guests, making his stance clear. Minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, Cormac emerged. It is as Everhart described. Simple shelter, supplies for winter, no weapons beyond hunting tools, no evidence of hostile intent. They are orcs, Aldrich exploded. Their intent does not matter, they are enemies by nature. They are refugees protected by the magistrate's ruling, Cormac said firmly. The inspection is complete. We return to Greystone and report our findings. Aldrich looked ready to argue further, but one of the militia, a young man named Tomas, spoke up. Sir, look at them. They are just people, scared people. I do not see any threat here. It was a small statement, but the impact was immediate. One of the orcs was seen as a person, not a monster. Kaden saw Groshka's shoulders relax slightly, saw hope flicker in Makra's eyes. Cormac nodded. We leave. Everhart, you and your guests are to maintain this peaceful arrangement. Any sign of trouble, any reports of theft or violence, and we will return with force. Do you understand? We understand. The militia left, even Aldrich grudgingly following, though his expression promised this was not over. When they were gone, the tension broke. Zuriel burst into tears again, this time from relief, and Drenka pulled her into a tight embrace. Gorduk sat heavily on a log, his injured leg clearly paining him. The sisters exchanged looks of disbelief. Groshka approached Kaden, and to his surprise, she placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of deep respect in Orc culture. You have given us more than shelter, Kaden Everhart. You have given us hope. I will not forget this. We are not safe yet, Kaden cautioned. Aldrich will look for any excuse to cause trouble. We need to be careful, more careful than ever. But as he looked around at the 7 faces watching him with trust and gratitude, he felt something shift inside himself. For 5 years he had lived alone, telling himself it was enough, that isolation was safety. But these past weeks had shown him what he had been missing: purpose, connection, the sense that what he did mattered. His eyes found Makra's, and she smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her scarred face into something beautiful. His heart did something complicated in his chest. Winter came to the Westmark in earnest, bringing cold winds and early snow. The longhouse proved its worth, keeping the orcs warm and dry while the forge provided Kaden with steady work. Fewer customers came, but those who did were the ones who had always valued his craftsmanship over politics. It was enough to survive on, especially with the orcs contributing game and foraged foods to their shared supplies. Kaden found himself spending more time at the longhouse than in his own house. The orcs had created a sense of home there that his solitary dwelling lacked. There was always someone cooking, someone mending, someone telling stories by the fire. Gorduk taught him orc songs that were surprisingly beautiful, full of harmonies and ancient melodies. Drenka shared her knowledge of herbs and healing, expanding what he had learned during the war. Nazga and Ursha made him laugh with their bickering, which was constant but affectionate. Zuriel followed him around like a shadow when he visited, asking endless questions about blacksmithing and the world beyond their small refuge. And Makra. She was at the forge every day that weather permitted, working beside him, learning his craft, becoming essential to his routine. They developed a rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with glances and small gestures as much as words. She laughed at his dry humor, challenged his assumptions, and made him think about things he had long ago stopped questioning. One snowy evening, while they worked late to finish a commission, she asked him about his time in the army. What was the worst part? She said, holding a piece steady while he shaped it. The fighting. No, Kaden said after a moment. The fighting was terrible, but at least in those moments you were reacting, surviving. The worst part was the quiet times after, when you had to think about what you had done, who you had killed. When you tried to remember if the orc you had stabbed looked afraid or angry or resigned. When you wondered if they had families waiting for them to come home. You thought about us that way, as people, not at first. At first, you were the enemy, and that made it easier. But as the war dragged on, as I saw orc villages burning and children fleeing, it became harder to see you as monsters. You were just the other side, people fighting for the same reasons we were. Survival, protection, home. Macra set down the piece they were working on and turned to face him fully. Is that why you saved us? Because you felt guilty about the war, partly, but mostly because it was wrong. Whatever happened during the war, whatever crimes were committed on both sides, the war is over. Hanging travelers for being orcs is not justice. It is just more violence, more hatred, more death. You could have walked away, let us die and saved yourself a world of trouble. I could have, but I would have had to live with that choice. I have enough ghosts already. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his face. Her hand was warm, calloused from work, gentle despite her strength. You are a good man, Kaden, better than you believe yourself to be. You do not know what I did during the war, the things I am responsible for. I know who you are now. That is what matters. They stood like that, her hand on his cheek, his breath catching in his throat, the forge fire casting dancing shadows around them. Then, with a boldness that surprised them both, Kaden leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. She stiffened for just a moment, and panic flared in him, but then she was kissing him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. They kissed like drowning people finding air, like winter finally giving way to spring, like two broken pieces discovering they could fit together into something whole. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Macra laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Well, she said, that was unexpected. Sorry, I should have asked, I should not have assumed. She silenced him with another kiss, shorter but no less intense. I wanted it too, you fool. I have wanted it for weeks, but thought you saw me only as a responsibility, another stray you had taken in. You are not a stray, you are. He struggled for words. You are the first person in years who has made me want to be part of the world again, who has made me feel like maybe I deserve to be happy. Then be happy with me, she said simply. If you want to. If you think an orc and a human can build something together. I think we already have. They told the others the next day. Zuriel was delighted, declaring that she had known all along. Gortuk clapped Kaden on the back hard enough to nearly knock him over, laughing. Nazga and Ursha exchanged knowing looks that suggested they had been gossiping about this possibility for some time. Drenka smiled warmly and said something in Orcish that made Macra blush, but Groshka was quiet. After the initial congratulations, she pulled Kaden aside while Macra was distracted by Zuriel's excited planning of some kind of celebration. You understand what this means, Groshka said quietly. The complications this will create. I understand that I care about her, that she makes me happy. That is enough. Is it? When your neighbors find out, and they will, the hostility will increase. They already distrust you. This will confirm their worst fears, that you have been corrupted by the enemy, that you have turned your back on your own kind. Then they were never my kind to begin with. Groshka studied him. You would give up everything, your place in human society, your business, your future, all for my daughter. Yes. Why? Because she is worth it. Because what we have is real, and I have lived long enough in a world of fake things. I fought in a war that was supposedly about honor and protecting our way of life, but really it was about greed and power. I lived in a community that supposedly valued justice, but was willing to commit murder out of fear and prejudice. I am tired of pretending. Macra is the most genuine thing in my life. I will not give that up because people disapprove. Groshka's stern expression softened. You truly love her. It was not a question, but Kaden answered anyway. I do. Then you have my blessing for whatever it is worth, but know this, you are now part of our family. We protect our own. If trouble comes, we face it together. I would not have it any other way. Winter deepened, and the small community at the forest's edge settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Kaden and Makra made no secret of their relationship, and while it raised eyebrows on the rare occasions outsiders visited, no one directly challenged it. Aldrich had apparently lost interest after the magistrate's ruling, or at least was biding his time. But peace, Kaden was learning, was often temporary. In early spring, as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the earth, Cormac appeared at the forge alone. His expression was troubled, and Kaden's stomach sank before the man even spoke. I need to talk to you, Cormac said. Somewhere private. They walked to the stream out of earshot of both the forge and the longhouse. Cormac stood for a moment, clearly struggling with what to say. I have been hearing things, he finally began. Rumors out of the capital. The king is planning something, some kind of initiative regarding the Orc territories. There is talk of forced relocations, of clearing the border regions entirely, pushing all Orcs further north. Kaden felt cold despite the warming weather. Why? Resource claims. The territories have mineral deposits, fertile land. With the war over, the crown wants to expand, and the easiest way to do that is to remove the current inhabitants. That is not expansion. That is ethnic cleansing. I know, and I do not support it. But orders are orders, Kaden. When they come down, militia across the Westmark will be expected to enforce them. That includes identifying any Orcs on settled lands and removing them, forcibly if necessary. You are warning me. I am telling you that you have maybe 2 months, 3 at most, before soldiers arrive to implement this policy. When they do, they will find your guests. And they will not care that they are peaceful, that they are refugees, that they have harmed no one. They will remove them. Probably kill them if they resist. Kaden stared at the water, his mind racing. What can I do? Get them out. Now, send them deep into the territories, somewhere so remote that they will not be found. Or, Cormac hesitated. There are people networks who help Orcs disappear. Sympathizers who believe this policy is wrong. I can put you in contact with them. They can move your friends somewhere safe, give them new identities, help them start over. And what about Makra? Cormac's expression said he had been expecting that question. She would have to go with them. There is no way she can stay here, not with what is coming. I am sorry. After Cormac left, Kaden sat by the stream for a long time, trying to process what he had learned. Just when they had found some measure of safety, some small piece of happiness, the world was conspiring to tear it away. He told them that evening, gathering everyone at the longhouse. The news was received with varying degrees of despair and anger. Gorduk wanted to fight. Nazga and Ursha wanted to run immediately. Zuriel cried. Drenka looked grimly resigned. Groshka simply nodded as if she had been expecting this. So we leave, she said. We head north, try to stay ahead of this policy. There is another option, Kaden said. Cormac mentioned networks that help Orcs relocate safely, people who oppose what the king is doing. They can provide documentation, safe passage, even help you start new lives somewhere the crown's reach does not extend. You trust these networks? Groshka asked. I trust Cormac, and I trust that there are good people who see this policy for what it is, wrong. Then we will try that. But Kaden, this help, it will not be free. What do they want in return? I do not know yet, but I will find out. The network contact turned out to be a woman named Alara, who operated a way station 3 days' ride from Kaden's forge. Cormac arranged the meeting, and Kaden made the journey alone, not wanting to risk moving the Orcs until he knew more. Elara was middle-aged, weather-worn, with sharp eyes that assessed him thoroughly before she would even discuss details. "Cormac vouches for you," she said. "Says you are trustworthy, but I need to hear from you why you are helping Orcs. Most humans would not." Kaden told her the truth, about saving them from hanging, about offering shelter, about falling in love with Macra. Elara listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she nodded. "All right. I believe you. Here is what I can offer. We have a route that takes refugees north and west into the Frost Peaks where there are Orc settlements beyond the king's jurisdiction. It is dangerous, mountain passes that are only navigable in late spring and summer, but it is safe on the other end. I can provide guides, supplies, and documentation that will help them settle there." "What is the cost?" "Information, mostly. We are building a record of what is happening. Testimonies from refugees about the policy, about attacks on Orc communities, about the Crown's actions. When the time is right, we will present this evidence to sympathetic members of the Council, pressure them to change course. Your friend's story, what happened in Greystone, the fact that a human protected them, that would be powerful testimony. They can provide that. What else? Money. Moving people is expensive. We do not profit. Everything goes back into helping more refugees, but there are costs. 500 gold. It was a staggering sum, more than Kaden had ever possessed at once, but he nodded without hesitation. "I will get it." Back at the forge, he took stock of everything he owned: his tools, his anvil, his horse, his small house, the land itself. It was not much, but it represented 12 years of work, of building a life from nothing, and he would give all of it up in a heartbeat if it meant keeping Macra and the others safe. He started selling. The anvil went to a smith in a neighboring town. The tools followed. His horse, his cow, everything that could be converted to coin. It was not enough. He sold the land and the buildings themselves to Marcus, the Fletcher farmer, who had remained quietly supportive through everything. Marcus paid fair price, more than fair perhaps, and did not ask questions about why. In 3 weeks, Kaden had the money. He also had nothing left. He was effectively homeless, possessing only his clothes, a few personal items, and the location of Elara's way station. When he told Macra what he had done, she stared at him in shock. "You sold everything. Your home, your livelihood, everything? It was just stuff. You are more important. Kaden, what will you do? Where will you go? With you, I am coming north, if you will have me." She looked at him for a long moment, her yellow eyes bright with unshed tears. "You would leave your life behind. Leave humanity behind, for me, for you, for all of you, for the chance to build something better than what exists here." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Macra. I want to be with you, wherever that means going, if you feel the same way." "I do," she whispered. "I love you too. I think I have since you first cut me down from that tree, though I did not understand it then. But Kaden, you must be certain. Once you go north, you cannot come back. You will be an exile, a traitor in the eyes of your people. Is this truly what you want, more than anything?" They left on a morning when mist hung low over the fields and the world seemed caught between sleeping and waking. 8 figures walked into the forest, toward the way station and the journey beyond. Kaden took one last look at his forge, cold and abandoned, and felt no regret. Whatever he was leaving behind was worth less than what he was walking toward. The journey to the Frost Peaks took 6 weeks. Elara's network proved its worth, providing guides who knew the safest routes, way stations where they could rest and resupply, and information about patrols to avoid. They traveled mostly at night, sleeping during the day in hidden camps. It was exhausting, nerve-wracking work, and there were moments when Kaden wondered if they would make it. But they did. As summer reached its height, they crossed into the high passes of the Frost Peaks, into territory that was effectively independent of any crown's rule. The Orc settlements here were ancient, carved into the mountainsides, self-sufficient and proud. They were also welcoming in a way Kaden had not expected. Here, a human traveling with Orcs was unusual but not threatening. Here, his relationship with Makra raised eyebrows but not hostility. Grashka found them a place in a community called Ironheart, a settlement of perhaps 200 Orcs built around natural hot springs that kept the valleys warm even in winter. There was work for everyone. Gorduk used his farming knowledge to improve crop yields. Drenka established herself as a healer, her herb knowledge combined with local traditions creating a thriving practice. Nazga and Ursha became hunters, providing meat for the community. Zuriel was taken in by a teacher who recognized her quick mind and began educating her properly. Grashka became an advisor to the settlement's council, her experience and wisdom valued, and Kaden built a forge. The settlement's old smith had died the previous winter, and they desperately needed someone with the skill to maintain tools and weapons. Kaden's human techniques combined with Orc metalworking traditions, and he found himself creating things more beautiful than he had ever managed alone. Makra worked beside him, as she always had. They built a small house near the forge, simple but comfortable, and filled it with the life they were creating together. On a cool autumn evening with the first snow falling on the peaks above, Kaden asked her to marry him. "We are already partners," she said, smiling. "In every way that matters." "Then let me make it official, in both our cultures, an Orc ceremony and a human one. Show everyone that this is real, that what we have can last." "Yes," she said, kissing him. 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place in the spring, combining human and Orc traditions in a ceremony that was unique and perfect. Grashka presided over the Orc portion, binding their wrists together with a cord made from their own hair, symbolizing the joining of two lives. Alara traveled from the lowlands to perform the human ceremony, speaking words about love and commitment that echoed across the valley. The settlement celebrated for 3 days, and Kaden had never been happier, but the joy was shadowed by news from the lowlands. The forced relocation policy had been implemented with brutal efficiency. Thousands of Orcs had been driven from their homes, many killed resisting, others simply displaced into territories that could not support them. Refugee columns wound through the mountains, seeking safety, and Ironheart absorbed as many as it could. Among those refugees, nearly a year after Kaden and his family had arrived, came a familiar face. Cormac rode into Ironheart on a tired horse, looking older than his years. "I left," he told Kaden when they met at the forge. "Could not follow those orders anymore, could not be part of what they were doing. The militia disbanded, or at least all the decent people left. It is just thugs now, carrying out atrocities in the king's name. What will you do?" "Stay here if they will have me. Alara says there is need for people with military experience to help train defenders in case the crown's reach extends this far. I can do that. I can help protect what you have built here." Kaden clasped his arm in a warrior's grip. "Welcome home." As more refugees arrived, bringing stories of loss and horror, Kaden found himself working with Alara and others to expand the network. They established more way stations, more routes, moved more families to safety. It was dangerous work, and there were losses, but every Orc they saved felt like a small victory against the tide of hatred that had driven the war and its aftermath. 2 years after their arrival in the Frost Peaks, Makra told him she was pregnant. Kaden felt joy and terror in equal measure. A child, half human and half Orc, in a world that struggled to accept either parent, let alone their union. But when he looked at Makra, At her fierce, protective love already evident, he felt hope instead. Their daughter was born in the autumn, during the harvest season. She had green-tinged skin lighter than her mother's, small tusks, pointed ears, and her father's gray eyes. They named her Asha, which meant hope in the old Orc tongue. The settlement embraced her completely. She became everyone's child, passed between households, doted on, protected. As she grew, it became clear she had inherited strengths from both parents. She was strong like her mother, clever like both, and possessed a natural charisma that drew people to her. On Asha's 5th birthday, Kaden stood outside his forge, watching her play with other children in the settlement square. Makra came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" "Never," he said honestly. "I gave up a life that was empty for one that is full. I traded isolation for family, cynicism for hope, survival for purpose. How could I regret that, even when I am difficult, when I get angry at you for leaving tools out?" he laughed. "Even then, especially then." She leaned against him, and they watched their daughter together. Asha was teaching a younger Orc child how to braid hair, patient and gentle despite her young age. In her, Kaden saw the future he had fought for, the world he had hoped might be possible. A world where human and Orc were not enemies but family, where children grew up knowing love instead of hatred, where the sins of the past did not dictate the possibilities of tomorrow. "Thank you," Makra said softly. "For what?" "For seeing us when no one else would. For cutting us down from those ropes. For choosing love over fear. For building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Kaden replied. "For trusting me when you had no reason to. For loving me despite everything. For giving me a reason to be part of the world again." As the sun set over the frost peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Kaden Everhart felt something he had not experienced since before the war. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, because there were still struggles, still prejudice and danger and uncertainty in the world. But internal peace. The knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he should be doing, with exactly the people who mattered most. He had saved 7 hanged Orcs and uncovered a terrible plot, yes. But more importantly, he had found himself in the process. Had discovered that the man he had become during the war was not the man he had to remain. That change was possible, that growth was possible, that love was possible even in the darkest times. Asha ran over, throwing herself at her father's legs with the absolute trust that only small children possess. He scooped her up, settling her on his hip while Makra wrapped her arms around them both. They stood like that, a family, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Tell me the story," Asha demanded as she did most nights. "The story of how you and Mama met." "Again?" Kaden asked, though he was already smiling. Again, so he told it, the story of a hanging tree and a choice and 7 lives saved. Of a forge in the wilderness and a family built from refugees and determination. Of love found in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people, creating something beautiful from ashes and pain. And as he spoke, he saw others gathering to listen. Not just Orcs, but humans too, the ones who had followed Cormac north, seeking a different kind of life. All of them drawn to this story, to this testament that the world could be more than its worst impulses, that people could choose compassion over cruelty, love over hatred, hope over despair. The story ended where it always did, with a wedding under the stars and a promise to build something better. Asha applauded as she always did and demanded another story, but Grashka intervened, scooping up her granddaughter with practiced ease. "Time for bed, little one. Your parents need rest too. But I want more stories. Tomorrow there will be new stories," Grashka promised. That is the beauty of life. There is always another story waiting to be told. As the crowd dispersed, returning to their homes and their own stories, Kaden and Macra walked back to their house hand in hand. Inside, the fire was warm, the bed was comfortable, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys in equal measure. But tonight, this moment was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Kaden had learned, through pain and growth and love, that saving 7 hanged orcs was not the end of the story but the beginning. That uncovering a terrible plot was important, but what you built in response to that knowledge was what truly mattered. That being a lone blacksmith did not mean being alone, not if you opened your heart to the possibilities. He had found his family in the most unlikely place, built his home from nothing in a harsh land, and created a future that honored both the struggles of the past and the hopes for tomorrow. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That love was not limited by species or tradition, but grew wherever hearts were open to it. That redemption was possible even for those who had done terrible things, as long as they were willing to choose differently going forward. As he lay in bed that night, Macra sleeping peacefully beside him, Kaden thought about the man he had been when he first heard the commotion on the road. Isolated, haunted, certain that the best he could hope for was to avoid causing more harm. That man would barely recognize the person he had become. Husband, father, craftsman, protector, part of a community that valued what he could offer and overlooked what he lacked. The last thought he had before sleep claimed him was simple but profound. Saving those 7 lives had saved his own in return. In choosing to act, to care, to love despite the risks and costs, he had found a reason to live that went beyond mere survival. He had found purpose, meaning, joy. And that, in the end, was the real story. Not of orcs or humans, plots or politics, but of one person choosing compassion in a world that often rewarded cruelty. Of that choice rippling outward, touching others, creating change that seemed impossible until it was not. The hanging tree in Greystone still stood, a reminder of what had nearly been. But in the frost peaks in Ironheart, a different kind of monument existed, not one of wood and rope and death, but of stone and metal and life. A forge where 2 cultures met and merged, creating something stronger than either could achieve alone. A family that proved love could bridge any divide. A community that chose acceptance over fear. And at the center of it all, a lone blacksmith who had learned that saving 7 hanged orcs was the first step on a journey toward saving himself, toward finding the life he had not known he needed, toward building a future worth living in. The story ended there, with possibility and promise, with challenges ahead but also with hope. With a man and a woman and their daughter, a mixed family in a mixed community, proving every day that a better world was possible if people had the courage to create it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew down from the peaks and the forge fire cast dancing shadows, travelers would stop in Ironheart and ask about the human smith who worked alongside his orc wife. They would hear the story of rescue and refuge, of love and family, of choosing compassion over hate. And some of those travelers would stay, adding their own stories to the growing tapestry of a community built on the simple belief that everyone deserved a chance at life, at peace, at home. The terrible plot that Kaden had uncovered, the systematic ethnic cleansing disguised as policy, continued in the lowlands. But knowledge of it spread too, carried by refugees and resistors, by people like Alara who documented the atrocities and waited for their moment to present evidence to those with power to change things. It was slow work, frustrating work, often heartbreaking work. But it was work that mattered, And that was enough. Years later, when Asha was grown and had started her own forge in a neighboring settlement, when grandchildren played in the square where she had once played, when Kaden's hair had gone gray and Makra's tusks had yellowed with age, they would sit together and watch the sunset as they had done so many times before. "No regrets?" Makra would ask, the question now a comfortable ritual rather than a genuine inquiry. "Never," Kaden would reply and mean it with his whole heart. "Everything I lost, I got back 1,000 times over. Everything I gave up, I replaced with something better. Every choice I made that day at the hanging tree led me here, to you, to this life, to this family. How could I regret any of that?" And Makra would smile, the expression crinkling the scars that marked her face, making them beautiful because they were part of her story, part of their story, part of the journey that had led them both to this moment of contentment and love. The story of the lone blacksmith who saved 7 hanged orcs became legend in the Frost Peaks, told to children as an example of courage, to young lovers as proof that differences need not divide, to refugees as evidence that kindness still existed in a harsh world. It grew in the telling, gained embellishments, became myth. But for Kaden and Makra and their family, it was simply their life. The choice they had made, the family they had built, the love they had nurtured through challenges and joy alike. It was the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not because they were heroes, but because they were decent, not because they were special, but because they refused to be complicit in cruelty. Kaden Everhart had been a lone blacksmith, isolated and haunted by his past. But he had become so much more. He had become a husband, a father, a community leader, a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear. And though the world beyond the Frost Peaks still struggled with prejudice and violence, still grappled with the aftermath of war and the terrible plots of those who sought power over people, in this one corner of the world, in this one community, there was proof that another way was possible. 7 orcs had hung from a tree, minutes from death, and one man had said no. Had cut them down, sheltered them, protected them, and in doing so had started a chain of events that touched hundreds of lives, saved countless others, and proved that individual choice mattered, that one person could make a difference, that the world could be changed one act of courage at a time. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the legacy of the day Kaden Everhart walked toward a hanging tree and chose compassion. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.